In 1870, Britain produced 1% of global GDP. Yet today, services dominate 82% of its economy. If Britain invented the modern factory, why did it systematically dismantle them? The answer reveals a self-inflicted wound. The story begins in the 18th century. Britain pioneered industrialization, transforming from an agrarian society into the first modern economic superpower. Steam engines and mechanized looms replaced manual labor. This tiny island nation became the undisputed workshop of the world, fueling an empire. At its absolute peak in 1870, Britain stood unchallenged. It accounted for a staggering 1% of world GDP. British steel built railways across continents, and British ships dominated global trade routes. The nation's industrial might seem permanent, an eternal engine of progress. But this unprecedented wealth created an illusion of invincibility. The British elite believed their industrial monopoly was a natural law. They failed to realize that the very technologies they exported would soon empower their rivals. The seeds of deindustrialization were already planted in this golden age. Across the Atlantic and the English Channel, a fierce challenge was brewing. The Second Industrial Revolution ignited rapid modernization in the United States and Germany. These emerging powers adopted newer, more efficient technologies. Meanwhile, Britain clung to its aging infrastructure, blinded by past glories. Why fix what isn't broken? That was the fatal question. British industrialists saw no reason to reinvest their massive profits into modernizing their factories. They preferred safe dividends over risky innovation. This complacency allowed hungry, newly industrialized nations to slowly steal the crown. Then came the catastrophic blow of the 20th century. 2 world wars drained Britain's wealth and shattered its industrial capacity. The immense costs of fighting both conflicts significantly weakened Britain's economic position. The foundation of its industrial empire was permanently cracked. The wars forced a harsh reality check. Britain could no longer afford to maintain its sprawling industrial empire. The state began shifting its focus toward financial services and international trade. The factories that had built the empire were now considered costly liabilities. As if financial ruin wasn't enough, a new silent killer emerged. Technological inventions like industrial robots began eliminating manufacturing jobs globally. British factories faced a double threat: cheaper labor abroad and machines that didn't need human hands. The era of mass employment in manufacturing ended. Britain's industrial empire seemed unassailable. Its factories hummed with the confidence of a century. Yet across the Atlantic and the English Channel, a new generation of rivals was already sharpening its edge. The workshop of the world was about to discover that dominance is never permanent. By 1870, Britain held 1% of global GDP, but new rivals were already building faster, cheaper, and bigger. The Second Industrial Revolution in America and Germany didn't just challenge the British Empire. It fundamentally eroded its century-old competitive edge. The First World War delivered a devastating economic blow. Britain didn't just lose lives, it lost immense financial capital. The costs of fighting from 1914 to 1918 significantly weakened its industrial capacity, reducing its competitive edge in global markets. But the true cost wasn't just in gold. It was in the factories left to rust. While British industry converted to war production, American and German rivals were innovating mass production techniques. Britain was silently falling behind. The interwar years offered no relief. Britain's aging factories struggled to compete with newer, heavily mechanized plants overseas. The crown of industrial supremacy was slipping away, and no one seemed able to catch it. The nation's economic foundation was fracturing. Did the government fail to modernize, Or was this decline inevitable? Share your perspective below. The truth is, Britain was about to face an even greater economic catastrophe that would reshape its industrial soul forever. World War II delivered the final economic shock. Victory came at a staggering price. Britain was forced to liquidate the remainder of its overseas investments and accept massive loans, shifting global financial power across the Atlantic to Washington. The strategic bombing campaigns didn't just level infrastructure. They exposed the deep fragility of British manufacturing. Factories that survived the war were often outdated, operating with pre-war machinery. Meanwhile, untouched rivals were building the future of industrial automation. Could an exhausted nation rebuild its industrial might while drowning in debt? The answer was a painful no. The wars forced Britain to prioritize immediate survival over long-term industrial strategy, permanently weakening its capacity relative to the rising superpowers. By 1945, Britain emerged victorious but economically hollowed out. The workshop of the world was now a debtor nation. It relied heavily on foreign aid, struggling to maintain global commitments against rivals who hadn't fought on their own soil. The industrial landscape was fundamentally altered. The financial drain of 2 world wars meant less capital for modernization. Britain was trading its industrial dominance for a fragile service economy, a shift that would accelerate in the coming decades. Therefore, Britain emerged from the 20th century's wars victorious but economically exhausted. The empire was crumbling, but the final blow to its manufacturing heart wouldn't come from foreign bombs, but from its own devastating trade policies. What do you think were the specific trade policies that dealt the final blow to Britain's manufacturing? During the 1980 and 1990, Britain opened its markets to less developed nations. Free trade agreements were instituted, triggering a massive exodus of industrial production. Labor-intensive manufacturers relocated to countries with much lower wages, fundamentally altering the domestic economy. Why keep paying a British factory worker when labor overseas cost pennies on the pound? Labor-intensive manufacturers relocated production to countries with much lower wages. The global supply chain was rewriting the rules of the economy, leaving domestic facilities empty. Economists fiercely debated this transformation. Was this positive deindustrialization, a natural and painless shift to a modern service economy? Or was it a catastrophic negative failure of industrial policy, leaving entire communities destitute and hollowed out? The answer depended heavily on where you stood. If a nation trades its industrial might for banking and software, what happens to the workers left behind? Was this deindustrialization a deliberate government choice or an unavoidable global trend? Share your perspective in the comments. The service sector boomed, promising a sleek post-industrial future. Financial services in London generated unprecedented wealth. Yet this new economy was deeply fragile. It concentrated riches in the capital, while the industrial heartlands decayed, creating a fractured nation reliant on invisible exports. By the turn of the millennium, the numbers told a stark story. Manufacturing's share of the national output had collapsed. Britain was consuming goods made abroad, paying for them with revenues from a volatile financial sector. The trade deficit widened into a dangerous chasm. But how could a nation that once dominated global trade suddenly depend entirely on importing basic goods? The answer lay in a deliberate political philosophy. Successive governments believed market forces would naturally allocate resources better than any industrial strategy ever could. This faith in the market had a devastating blind spot. It ignored the strategic necessity of making things. When factories closed, the supply chains, skilled engineers, and regional innovation ecosystems died with them. You cannot simply reboot a lost industry overnight. Globalization had offered cheaper consumer goods, but it came with a hidden, exorbitant price tag. Britain had walked into a trap. It traded its resilient industrial base for a service economy that could shatter during the slightest financial shock. The vulnerability was systemic. As the debate raged on, a silent transformation occurred inside the few factories that remained. The threat was no longer just cheap foreign labor. The machines that stayed behind were evolving, making human workers entirely obsolete. Automation accelerated job losses faster than offshoring ever could. Even if production returned to British shores, the factories of the future required a fraction of the workforce. The industrial worker was becoming an artifact of a bygone era. During the 1980s and 1990s, labor-intensive manufacturers relocated to countries with much lower wages. This mass exodus stripped Britain of its industrial base. Yet, a more silent mechanical revolution was already underway. The factories that survived this offshoring wave faced a new, invisible enemy. It wasn't foreign competition, but relentless technological progress. Industrial robots, once a distant promise, became a harsh reality on the British shop floor. These mechanical workers didn't demand holidays, sick pay, or tea breaks. They simply operated around the clock. As automation advanced, countless manufacturing jobs evaporated. The need for manual labor plummeted, leaving thousands of skilled workers obsolete. If machines were producing more goods, why did the economy suffer? The answer lies in wealth distribution. While productivity soared, the wages of the average factory worker stagnated. Entire communities lost their primary source of income. As automation hollowed out the industrial base, the service sector swelled to fill the void. By 2022, services contributed an overwhelming 82% of the national GDP. Britain was no longer making things. It was managing, selling, and serving. But the transition to a service economy relied on cheap energy to keep remaining industries alive. That lifeline was severed in 2005. The United Kingdom officially became a net importer of oil, ending decades of domestic energy independence. The North Sea oil boom, which had masked the decline of British manufacturing, was finally over. With domestic reserves dwindling, the nation became dangerously exposed to global energy markets. Every barrel imported meant higher costs for factories still standing. Energy-intensive industries, from steel to chemicals, suddenly found their operating costs skyrocketing. They were caught in a vice. Squeezed by cheap foreign labor on one side and expensive imported energy on the other, their competitive edge vanished. Then came the final blow. In 2008, the global financial system collapsed, dragging the British economy down with it. The banking sector, the crown jewel of the new service economy, was on the brink of total failure. To prevent a complete collapse, the government was forced to intervene on a massive scale. Bank bailouts pushed government spending up to a staggering 48% of GDP by 2009. The state absorbed the financial sector's losses to save the system. If you want to understand the forces shaping our economies, subscribe now. But this financial rescue came with a brutal opportunity cost. With billions poured into saving the banks, there was no fiscal room left for an industrial rescue. The manufacturing sector, already bleeding from automation, was abandoned to its fate. If you want to see how this financial gamble created a fragile service economy built on private debt, subscribe for our next episode. The industrial heartlands fell completely silent, leaving behind a dangerous and unequal economic imbalance. The factories that survived offshoring were squeezed out by high energy costs and automated efficiency. The industrial heartlands, once the proud engine of the world, fell silent. The machines that remained needed fewer hands, and the energy cost a fortune. But as the smoke cleared from Britain's industrial heartlands, What was left to sustain the economy? The answer would reshape the nation's social fabric. It created a dangerous reliance on the financial sector that had pushed the country to the brink. By 2022, the service sector contributed a staggering 82% of the United Kingdom's GDP. The nation that once forged iron and spun cotton for the entire globe had transformed. But what happens when a global superpower simply stops making things? The factories fell silent, replaced by call centers, banking halls, and digital startups. Britain traded its industrial stability for a service-based economy that is wealthy but highly vulnerable. This wasn't an accident. It was an engineered transition. This new economic reality brought dangerous dependencies. In 2022, 42% of UK exports went to the European Union, while 48% of imports came from it. This deep integration exposed British manufacturing to fierce, competitive pressures. When Brexit finally arrived, it fractured those vital supply chains. Factories that had survived decades of decline suddenly faced crippling customs delays and labor shortages. The service economy thrived, but the remnants of industry were pushed to the brink. Can a nation truly remain secure when it relies entirely on others for its physical goods? The answer emerged during recent global crises. An economy without factories might just be an economy without a safety net when the world stops trading. Since 2005, the UK has been a net importer of oil. This reliance on foreign energy drastically increased costs for domestic manufacturing, destroying the competitiveness of energy-intensive industries. The coal that powered the empire was gone. The 2008 financial crisis exposed the fragility of this service model. In 2009 and 2010, government spending surged to 48% of GDP to bail out failing banks. The fiscal strain left no room for industrial policy. The state saved finance, not factories. Britain didn't just lose its manufacturing crown to rivals like the United States or Germany. Through war debts, globalization, and technological shifts, it actively engineered its own deindustrialization. The workshop of the world deliberately closed its doors. The nation traded its industrial might for a fragile service economy. It is undeniably wealthy today, generating massive revenue through global finance and technology. Yet, this wealth is highly concentrated and incredibly vulnerable to global shocks, leaving many behind. The nation that once supplied the world's goods now primarily supplies the world's services. The transition is complete. But as recent global crises show, an economy without factories might just be an economy without a safety net. The workshop of the world is now a quiet museum of its former glory. The machines have stopped. The empire of production has faded into history. Britain built the modern world, but it forgot to build its own future. The legacy of British industry remains a powerful cautionary tale for modern superpowers. It shows how a nation can sacrifice long-term stability for short-term financial gains. The factories are largely gone, leaving behind a prosperous but precarious economic landscape. If you want to understand how other great empires collapsed under the weight of their own economic choices, watch our next video exploring the fall of the Spanish Empire. History often repeats its cruelest lessons for the unprepared.